Everyone. This webinar is called Productionalize Your Dapr-Enabled Apps with Diagrid Conductor Advisor. And yes, I know productionalize is not a word. We used to use the word like operationalize a lot, so that's where we got that from. My name's Alice Gibbons. I'm a customer success engineer here at Diagrid. And yeah, it's my pleasure to be working with y'all. One of the things just wanted to quick call out before we kind of keep going too far. If you haven't been to any of our webinars before and you don't want to learn a little bit more about Diagrid, we are the company that co-created the Dapr and Kata projects. Those two smiling gentlemen on the right there worked on it themselves. And our mission here is to boost developer productivity by providing tools and APIs for building and operating cloud native applications. Bit of a mouthful. And we actually just had a release yesterday for Catalyst, which is one of our products. We are a cloud native CNCF Silver member and have a bunch of amazing venture capitalist partners that you can see on here. And again, we are really the Dapr company. So if you are using Dapr, whether that be, just starting out or, in production, you definitely come to the right place. And I hope you'll take advantage of some of the content that we have. So just, I have a super short amount of slides today before I want to kind of get into the meat of the presentation, which is really talking about Conductor Advisor, some of the new features we've added there, as well as some of the plans for the future. I wanted to discuss a little bit on terms of if you are using Kubernetes and Dapr, this is really, we talk about this Kubernetes being the de facto way to run cloud native applications these days. And then Dapr is really the way that we think developing cloud native apps in the cloud, on-prem, really any distributed systems platform really is on the golden path to cloud native success. And this is, so if you're already kind of using these two things together, that's great. What we have built here at Diagrid is after talking to many, many, many Dapr users in production or all the way through from development, we realized that, operating Dapr in production has a number of challenges. So for instance, I won't drain this entire slide, but essentially things like deciding how to right size your Kubernetes applications, especially when there is a sidecar involved, is a non-trivial process. So figuring out, how to add those CPU memory limits and requests. Scheduling certificate upgrades without downtime, that's something that is kind of a gotcha in the open source project. So essentially, if you install Dapr with the open source version, there are self-signed certificates that can get installed with it, and those will expire after 1 year. And that has brought downtime to many, many of our users, actually. And then just other things like really rolling out Dapr upgrades to applications. Seems like it would be super easy, but there are always hidden complexities kind of behind the scenes when it comes to version management or making canary deployments, things like that. And so this really comes down to why we built Diagrid Conductor. And some of the features I'm going to be talking about today. Conductor really is meant to operate Dapr in production with confidence, so we really feel like that the Conductor reduces your operational burden and helps you, lower the amount of time you're spending on Kubernetes, whether that be as an admin or even as a developer. One other thing I wanted to call out while we're here is we also do offer Dapr open source enterprise support. Really, this is for those mission critical apps, and there are many of them that are actually using Dapr today, which is pretty cool. We have lots of enterprise companies, Fortune 500 all the way down to startups that have taken a dependency on Dapr and are using it within their distributed systems. So we do offer open source support for cases like this, things like production ready incident response, where that's kind of part of my team where we deal with issues with initial response times as low as 1 hour, and then for some specific cases have exclusive Dapr releases for critical fixes, because the open source project and the open source community is super great, and we are a big part of that at Diagrid here, but we understand that the turnaround time for some issues just might not cut it for enterprise organizations. We also offer things like debugging and issue resolution for upstream fixes, and then we work with our end users to prioritize features and bugs with our open source engineering team, who is entirely dedicated on the Dapr project. This also comes with a 30-day kind of conductor onboarding that we do, as well as multiple Dapr architectural reviews and best practice sessions, along with various upskilling on Dapr topics, things like, a new API or Dapr workflow that you might be interested in using, or just kind of gotchas for things like upgrading and some of the issues I talked about in the last slide. So with that, wanted to get into kind of more of the meat of it. A quick 1 second on how Conductor works if you haven't used it before, or if you're not familiar with the architecture. You can see here, this is kind of your very typical Kubernetes cluster. And really, this could be running anywhere, right? We have users adding their clusters on premises, of course, in all the main cloud providers or locally on your machine. So if you are a developer that is, developing and actually you kind of using your inner loop dev with a Kubernetes cluster, whether that be Kind or Minikube, that is something that is also supported with Conductor. And what Conductor does is, you install this agent on your machine or on your cluster, if you are the Dapr or the Kubernetes operator, and this is managing that Dapr control plane for you. So, you can see kind of all the Dapr control plane services up here, and of course that sidecar gets injected to each of the apps as well. This agent reaches outbound to our cloud, Diagrid cloud, and this is, only reaching outbound via a few um, fully qualified domain names for things like metrics and non-private information. So, all public info there. We have some more info or information on that in our docs. And then we actually did just reach SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. I believe that was last month. So that was exciting. We were SOC 2 Type 1 for a while, but made it to SOC 2 Type 2, which is great. And that is inclusive of our entire cloud and our products. So that's how it works. I'm going to specifically dive into Advisor today. And again, this is sort of like your best practices helper where, we have, as I said, worked with a ton of different Dapr users over the years. Most of us came from Microsoft where Dapr kind of was developed initially and we worked with users there, but then also at Diagrid, that's kind of our bread and butter. Some of the advisories that I'll get into here, you can kind of see across security, reliability, performance, and observability. And I believe right now we have over 50 production best practices, and that kind of continues to keep growing as new Dapr versions come out. So just a few kind of double clicking on some of that. Well, I'll talk about some of the zero trust app and cluster recommendations. Sort of the reliability aspect is more like around high availability and how we want to deploy that in the cloud, or really in any scenario where you have a lot of load. Performance is specific to cost savings and tailoring your memory and CPU settings for your specific applications. And then last but not least, observability is kind of just optimal configurations for whether that be debugging or whether that be for production. Just wanted to hop in here and just kind of give you a 2-minute overview of Conductor before diving into advisories. So you can kind of see this is my main Conductor dashboard, and this is where I'm going to go and add all of my different clusters, whether that be, across clouds, on-prem, locally. And we support a number of different cluster types. As I said, we are testing with all the main clouds, as well as, OpenShift, wherever that is running. And this is something that we do, so I can create a new cluster connection super quickly. Other would be really good for specifically like local Kubernetes versions, right? Kind or Minikube, things like that. Can install Dapr. We support a number of different versions on the control plane. Specifically, 14.4 is the latest version. And so we have the current version as well as the previous two listed on here. And then we also have a number of recommended home arguments profiles that come out of the box. And these, again, will give you some of those things like resource requests and, limits and things like that. And actually, by using our recommended helm profiles here, you will actually get on a really good start in terms of lowering the amount of conductor advisories that you will see in your cluster. I'll talk about that more in a minute. You can also check this box, and this is specifically to automating your certificate rotation. I touched briefly on that already. Essentially, expiring certificates is a huge issue in Dapr, and that chain of root trust that essentially provides MTLS throughout the cluster is by default backed by self-signed certs that will expire after 1 year. And so with Conductor, we replace those with Diagrid signed certs and then renew those at a 1 month renewal frequency or whatever you want, really. And then a best effort renewal window as well. And so, yeah, just to kind of give you an idea of how that looks, this will produce a kubectl apply command. And, if I was going to run this command on my cluster, I can just like essentially copy this guy and then put it into my, apply it as into my cluster and then see this guy go online. Now, for the interest of time, I'm going to hop into one that already has the cluster connected or the agent connected. And I'm going to just talk through a little bit of like what you'll see. So this is kind of the main cluster summary dashboard page. We have insights really broken up across, cluster, application, and then components. And again, if you're kind of newer to Dapr, components are going to be those backing infrastructure resources that Dapr reaches out to via the APIs or SDK. So one of the things we can check out here is you can kind of see we have these critical metrics issues in each section, as well as the high impact advisories. And high impact advisories, again, advisories can either act on the cluster, the application, or the component level, as you can see. And yeah, I'll get into kind of each one of these in a bit. Also, just a quick overview, we can see all of our Dapr applications running on the cluster. This is going to show you if there are any insights, like any issues detected in any of them, as well as of course, their Kubernetes pod status. So you can see a lot of these guys are looking healthy for now. So far, so good. But, this is something I can also alert on if anything is kind of going wrong for me. Alternatively, I can also view this as an application graph. So one of the really nice kind of features of Conductor here is the ability to be able to see how, the topology really of how your applications are deployed. And this is going to give me, how applications connect, both, service to service invocations. So if you take a peek at the legend, you'll see that solid lines are service invocations and dotted lines are pub sub calls. And then, along each of these lines, I also have kind of near real time metrics for the past few minutes for things like error rate, RPS, latency, things like that. And I can also see the dependencies on the infrastructure services. So for instance, I have this order service. In this case, it is publishing a message to the PubSub broker. In this case, we have a Kafka PubSub broker. It's also subscribing. And then there also is, two other subscribers in this case. We have a make line service and our order processor workflow. And then this yellow line here actually denotes a higher latency than expected. So, it's showing up as, over 16,000, yeah, 16,000 milliseconds there. So 16, 17 seconds. So yeah, kind of just a quick overview of the app graph. And this allows me to kind of get a better insight into my cluster itself, as well as how these applications are deployed and really, any metrics on any of these calls. I can also press the sync graph at any time to get a new, newer metrics showing up here. Again, just quickly, we can also see all of these components, which are getting those infrastructure resources deployed on our cluster as well. But essentially, you can see things like what that YAML component looks like. I can see, where it's deployed. And then these initialization statuses are really interesting. What they actually will do is they'll call out if the conductor agent cannot connect via network to the infrastructure. So you'll see here, it's going to tell me in this error, hey, we have an initialization error occurred. This is happening every minute, and it's going to update kind of live. So say if you lose connection for whatever reason, you can actually see that happening super quick in Conductor. I'm going to leave a lot of these for now, but you can see these are a lot of the other Dapr resources that you can use. So if you're a big actors user, if you have resiliency policies that you're taking advantage of, configurations or subscriptions, those are kind of ways you can visualize and kind of discover more insights about any of those resources. Getting into the meat of what we're kind of talking about today, I really wanted to touch on the advisory feature, right? This is specific to, all the different best practice recommendations for, across security, reliability, performance, and observability. And these actually get automatically generated based on your cluster environment. So you can kind of see here, I'm going to dive super deep into security first, but I can see, my total number of unresolved advisories across the cluster. I have 1 dismissed and I have 17 resolved. So, probably want to get that 17 number up. And I can also see just kind of a breakdown to how many are high, medium, or low in each of these categories. Obviously, the high ones being the highest impact, but on your security or on your reliability, things like that. So taking a peek into security, first, I wanted to call out a few that we've recently added. So one common gotcha within Dapr is these component versions. So components, as I said, are these infrastructure resources that are specified by YAML files that contain connection details to the infrastructure. And each of these components actually have versions that kind of go through the open source. So this is telling me, hey, one of my component versions is deprecated. This is not only a security risk, but it also could be a functionality risk really within your app, right? You could get something kind of going on here, and you'll see actually, so I clicked on the impacted resources section, and this is going to show me all of the different resources within the cluster that are impacted by the security recommendation. I also have a little blurb here that tells me, hey, what's going on? Why is this, why is this out of date, or why is this deprecated? And it's going to link me to the Dapr documentation, specifically telling me, hey, Dapr has 2 versions in this case of the Azure Blob Storage component, and in this case, I'm using V1, and it is not recommended to use V1 anymore. One of the things, so yeah, I can always dismiss these advisories too if I'm like, hey, I'm only using this in dev and it's still working for me. That's great. We do recommend, like, again, connecting some of your development clusters to Conductor though, to see some of these advisories and get kind of shift left some of this knowledge or some of these best practices, so that when you get to later environments, a lot of these are already done. Yes, and looking at the YAML file itself, I can actually see, hey, this is a V1 version of the component. This is that component spec I showed a little bit earlier. And then I actually also have an error on this one. It's giving me a credential error, but that's something different. But essentially, like, this is the reason why that component is being flagged for incorrect version. Specifically, I also have another one here that's super important. All of the Dapr resources can be scoped, and this is also a security risk for many reasons, specifically because you don't want new applications or or existing applications actually that don't need it to have access to infrastructure, whether that be a message broker, whether that be a state store, all of those things. So, in this case, I'm saying that this subscription has absolutely no scopes defined, right? And this is going to tell me that, scoping in Dapr is a huge feature. It allows you to reduce the number of sidecars that this resource is loaded into. So essentially what having the scope on here will do is it'll say like, hey, only load this into this order processing sidecar. And it'll only actually load the subscription in there in this case. And without having specifically for subscriptions, without having a scope on here, it's going to actually call the route. If I open actually this, so it's, my subscriptions orders. So I can also head over to the subscriptions page and check this out for real. It was this guy. So sure enough, no scopes on this one. It's actually, so what's actually going to happen here is all of the routes that are listed, all these default routes are going to be triggered by every single application, Dapr application in this namespace now, because there is no scope. And this could be, lead to unwanted behavior in your system. Again, a security risk because you have applications accessing those messages coming off the message broker that you might not need or want to, things like that. And again, just getting visibility into kind of what's going on there in Conductor. What else? I have around 16 security ones showing. So I talked about these 2. We have, really good ones specific to those MTLS certificates being close to expiry. Again, I mentioned how we can mitigate that using Conductor's built-in feature. And it kind of tells you some of that here. And then this is kind of cool too, because it also allows you to fix some of these directly within the UI here. So, if I click fix advisory, which this one's actually resolved, so I don't need to. But if I did, then this would enable certificate rotation for me on this cluster. What else? The other one I wanted to call out that's really important is specifically what components, when you can either add a secret directly into the component file. So again, components are going to contain those connection details, reaching out to that infrastructure, and typically those details contain some sort of secret information, right? You need a, in this case, a Redis secret to reach out to Redis, or you'll need a connection string to reach out to various components in the cloud. And oftentimes you don't want that information to be stored as plain text in Kubernetes. Kubernetes by default is not zero trust. It's not a zero trust environment. If you had a bad actor in there, you could totally just be reading all those components and getting some of that secret information. So, we highly, highly, highly recommend if you are going to be using, like at least use Kubernetes secrets is essentially like at the very, very, very bare minimum. And so this is going to tell me, hey, a couple of these components that you have within your system contain the value of the secret as plain text. And what we actually do from the conductor side is this data never actually leaves your cluster. So like I said before, we're not actually sending any private data to our cloud. It's all public data, things like container names, Helm values, memory, CPU. But we actually obfuscate this password value and all of the secret password values in the components. We run that advisory at the edge within your cluster, and then that information never gets sent to our cloud. So we know that this is a password stored directly as plain text. But we don't actually know what that is kind of from our side. So that's something we want to change. And then if I head back to advisories here, click on security again. Ooh. Yeah, and there's a number of other ones from a scoping perspective as well. So, I did discuss briefly some of like components having no scopes defined, as well as or subscriptions having no scopes defined. Component having no scope defined, same idea, right? Scoping, very common practice within Dapr, definitely best practice. You are going to have applications getting new or access to infrastructure that you might not want. And like you could have theoretically a new application be deployed within this namespace, the production namespace, and then have access to this Redis database, maybe, right? If you don't have a scope on here already. So just something to think about. In this case, it's calling out to this one here because you can kind of see, hey, there's no scoping in here. I'm just going to flip over now to my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to add a few of these advisories in just to kind of see how that updates in real time. So for instance, this is one of the passwords. I will change this after this webinar, I promise. So we have, this is my Kafka component, and this is the password showing up directly as plain text within my file. So here, Dapr best practice is to kind of copy this directly, and I'm going to just take this. Fix the spacing. That looks okay. Thank God for YAML editors that work. And then, this is, I'm within that cluster right now. So, let's see, I'm in the order system namespace. It's great. And I can just double check. Oops. That's fine. They're all running. But yeah, no secret. So we just have a Redis secret. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to reference a secret named Kafka password. And it's going to look for that secret by default within the Kubernetes secret store. And that is not created yet. As you can see, I only have my Redis password one. So I'm just going to create that guy. And yep, that's fine. Created that. And then I'm going to reapply this pub/sub YAML to, there you go. So that's configured. So if I get this, just to double check, triple check that I've done it. So there you go. So now the secret key reference, again, by default, we are reaching out to the Kubernetes secret store that is deployed by default in Kubernetes, and it's gonna reach out for that Kafka password. So now if I look at the secrets, okay, I got 2 of them. That's been around there. And then the other thing I'm gonna do while I'm in here is I'm actually just gonna add a few scopes into things to kind of get rid of those. So here is my, stay component. And what I'm gonna actually need to do here is just add scopes to whatever applications or whatever application IDs that are actually using it. So in this case, I know it's only these two that need it. And I'm going to add it in there. That's fine. And then this is, exactly the same thing as kind of I did before here. So if I add that in, cool. And then last but not least, the scopes for the subscription. And this one's a little different, right? Because and a subscription itself means that like any message that comes on that message broker is going to be routed to this order service application on the subscribing side. So I want to be super careful about my subscription scopes and like make sure that there is a route, orders on order service in order to pick that up. And then I'm going to apply this guy. Cool. So, okay, sweet. So those two are configured. So, that's just a couple ways to, run through those advisories. And then, those were some of my security ones, right? So you can see now it says subscription has no scopes, fine. Hopefully now, once I run what we can, so these are running every 15 minutes by default. But what we can also do is click sync advisories, and that should sync them automatically too. So I'm going to click this guy, let it run for a little bit. It'll be available in like about a minute or so. We can kind of double check to make sure those have changed. Moving on to some reliability ones that I just wanted to call out. The reliability in Dapr has a lot of features that make it really reliable out of the box. Things like resiliency policies, things like really solid metrics that you can monitor your system with. Now, some of the things that do not get deployed, do not get configured out of the box or necessarily are things like high availability mode. And this is something that's super important if you are using anything to do with the placement service, which is primarily for actors, but even if you're using like workflow or some of the newer APIs as well. And this allows you to deploy the placement service with 3 replicas instead of 1. And again, this is going to allow me to either dismiss or fix this depending on my environment. For environments like development, you might not need the 3 replicas, but for production, super recommend having those 3 replicas there. I can fix this automatically. And this is really handy because, it actually is going to update those control plane values using Helm. So I click confirm here. You're going to see just in a second, excuse me, that, advisory fix was applied. And then if I head back to summary here, you can see now it is actually being upgraded. So this is going to change nothing else within my cluster, only make the high availability true on the control plane. So just a few niceties that kind of Conductor gives you from that perspective. One of the other things I just wanted to call out is some high cardinality metrics in Dapr. And this is, I would say, a gotcha, especially if you are on like a platform or an observability team and need to monitor Kubernetes, because essentially what these metrics do is they make it super hard to read some of the graphs and read some of the data coming in from the Dapr sidecar. And if you are using Dapr for all of your, a lot of your APIs, things like service invocation and pub/sub, you want to definitely take advantage of some of those metrics. So it comes with over 150 metrics out of the box, and by default, depending on how you write your applications, you can have a high cardinality paths within each of these. So, there's 3 of these that are kind of showing up, and this will actually tell you whether it's gRPC or HTTP. It'll show you a really difficult graph to read. It'll essentially look like a GUID, or maybe there's a phone number, or I don't know how you write your applications, but there would be, it makes it super messy from an ops perspective. So these are great. And we also have, best practice recommendations, within how to do this. And there is docs on how to add path matching, which is actually a new feature in 1.14. And this allows you to, ensure that you are path matching on whatever paths that you have within your system. So, maybe you are using an order ID within some of your routes, and that is a GUID, or that's a number. And of course, that is going to show up as each individual metric within Dapr, unless you add this patch matching within your configuration. The other thing I wanted to talk about, so let's see if that is almost done. Okay, yeah, looks like that's done. So I'm going to actually click this guy one more time. Okay, I think we're at 24. So we're getting lower. So we're getting some advisories lower here. Oh, so there you go. So that one just switched to resolved. So remember I had that, fixed advisory here. This actually is now resolved, which is great. Again, all because I ran that through Conductor. The other thing that is, want to call out is there are a ton of new Dapr versions that get released, sometimes weekly, depending on security updates. And this can be super hard to keep up with. We've had many enterprise customers tell us like, wow, we cannot keep up with like such a fast moving open source project. And like, that's totally fair. One thing that we do now is we have like new notifications for every single version, right? And a lot of these patch versions are really important because they might be, P0 critical issues that may or may not affect you. So this is going to tell me, hey, I have this new, Dapr version available. This, of course, is living at the cluster level. I'm just going to walk you through a quick, zero downtime Dapr upgrade using Conductor. So again, that 1.14.4 is the latest version here. As mentioned, we support the latest version as well as the two most recent minor versions. We also try and get release candidates. So release candidates for new versions into Conductor, within hours of them being available upstream. We work really hard on that. We also have the ability to choose only a subset of applications to roll out. So this is super cool because, say I only want to test out 14.4 with the order service or with worker actor. That allows me to do that. Now, of course, if you roll out all your applications, it's going to update all of those sidecars. But how the Dapr upgrade feature works is it will upgrade the control plane first, and then only if that succeeds, upgrade the rest of the sidecars, or roll that version out to the sidecars. I can also see in here, I have that high availability flag set to true now, which is great. There's also a number of other kind of resources and limits set already for me, which is great. And then I can also schedule this upgrade to be at a time when maybe there are less users on my cluster, things like that. So I'm going to confirm this guy, and then you can kind of see it rolling out. So again, that 13.5 to 14.4 is a tested version upgrade. That is something, one single minor version upgrades are always recommended in Dapr. We do not recommend you going from 1.11 directly to 1.14 or 1.12 to 1.14 even. We always recommend you going to the next minor version that's ahead of the last. Said that in a weird way, but yes, you know what I mean. 1.13 to 1.14, 1.12 to 1.13. Now you can see it's upgrading. You can see this control plane is showing as degraded, and then you, of course, you'll see some of these uptime looking red, which is totally fine. And then I can kind of take a peek at this with a little bit more detail in the health section. And this is going to show me, it's going to show me 3 replicas because that is the high availability mode. And then I can also see some of the new services. And we also have this new scheduler service, which is a new service in 1.14. And this is primarily for the new jobs API that came out as well. And it is going to be used for more features such as actors and workflow moving forward. We also can see, we also can see things like memory and CPU, over the past, 7 days if you want to, but take a peek at any of that, Ooh, looks like that's probably when scheduler came in. Yeah, exactly. And take a look at that, however you might want to, whatever time frame that suits you best. And then if I come back over here, this is still showing as upgrading. I can also take a peek into the applications. And then right now it's still showing 13.5, but essentially, in a second here, once the upgrade finishes, because again, it'll roll out to the control plane first. And then after the control plane upgrade is finished, it'll roll out to, that subset of sidecars I chose. It will upgrade, you'll see this version change. If the upgrade to the control plane fails, one of the things that we will do in Conductor is automatically roll back to the last version that was successful. So, just providing some fail-safe features for you there, because there are some gotchas again with Dapr upgrades, things like installing or updating the Helm charts, things like ensuring that you are upgrading to a supported version. We just had a case in 1.14 actually where we actually redacted version 14.3 because it was a bad version. So things like that. So we don't actually have that version in Conductor. So you can't, we don't want to put foot guns in there so you won't run into those issues. Okay, so this is still working, so I can come back and check that later. If I move on now, so that was mostly reliability. Again, this one should be, once that upgrade completes, that new Dapr version notification will go away there. The other thing I just wanted to call out is things like Dapr app health checks. These are super, super important. And I have, right now it's actually affecting, yeah, I guess like most of my services here. And this is great because Dapr App Health Checks allow you, or it allows you as an app developer to, add this, healthy path or whatever, you consider your app to be healthy. Choose that logic that you want in there in your system, and then make sure that if that is not responding with, a 200 or whatever in, a specified probe timeout and interval, then if Dapr is actually smart enough to stop sending you requests at that point. So, it's kind of like a soft health check in that like it won't completely, shut anything down or do anything crazy, restart it. Kubernetes, of course, does all that with liveness and readiness probes, things like that. However, if you have, for whatever, if it's receiving too many requests, if the app is overloaded and taking a really, really, really long time to respond, those are really good cases to, um, those are really good cases to when these app health checks make a difference. And yeah, you can see here that, I don't have any of them deployed, so I should probably do that. And then, yeah, it also gives me more information into the docs there. Cool. Moving on to performance. So, some of the performance advisories, as I mentioned, might not be as high impact as like a security risk or like a huge reliability issue. However, one of the things that performance does really, really well is it makes sure that you are running kind of like as lean and as mean as you can. So what we do from a performance perspective is Conductor actually looks through all of your applications, all of your Dapr applications running in your cluster, and it will take the top 10 most resource intensive apps and it'll watch those over the past 10 to 15 days. And it'll create an average of both CPU and memory. And then it'll use a 90% resource buffer, or sorry, a 10% resource buffer. 90% would be a lot. 10% resource buffer, and it will request you or give you new values for requests and memory limits. We do not give you CPU limits because those are kind of contentious in Kubernetes and some people don't use them, including most of our deployments. However, we will actually give you this for both the application and sidecar container. So you can kind of see here, hey, the application container is telling me over the past 15 days, it's used around 3 millicores average. And, right now I have a 200 millicore request that's actually set for that. That's like my current resource request within my pod spec. Similarly, my memory is around, 95.18 megabytes. That is, 62% less of my current request. So, this could actually give me some serious money savings from a cloud perspective, or, just free up some more usage on my machine or on my cluster. Now, of course, this needs to be running, I will say, needs to be running at approximate load, right? So if you have this running, if you have these advisories running in dev or something, yeah, you can definitely lower them for your dev cluster. But like, this is really for more of a production readiness best practice, making sure that, you are running as lean as you can without, under provisioning or starving your applications. And similarly, that's the same thing for the Dapr sidecar, right? So, just like it did for the app container, you can kind of see, hey, I don't actually have requests set for the Dapr sidecar, and that's actually a gotcha within itself, or it's actually a recommendation within itself, is to set these guys. So by default, there is no CPU requests or memory limits set at all for Dapr sidecars. So out of the box, you deploy that into Kubernetes, it's free. It's free to do whatever it wants. I mean, of course, if there's default ones in your namespace, you'll get limited. But yes, so for the CPU uses around 10 millicores, the current request, of course, is not set. And right now the memory is around 43 megabytes. And so the new recommended values here are these three. And this is again using a 10% resource buffer. And then we also add this Go memory limit, which is around, I believe, 90% of the full memory limit for the sidecar. And this allows you to free up memory earlier. So it actually enables the garbage collector in Go to kind of go through and remove some of that memory that's not being used before it hits that 100% threshold. So also a best practice for many Go applications. So yeah, you're going to see a ton of these. So I think we do 10. for the top 10 most resource intensive apps in your cluster. And now I believe I only have 8 or 7 because I only have 7 apps in this cluster, which makes sense. And yeah, you can see here I also have some recommendations for setting those control plane requests and limits. That is good. And then last but not least, observability. Some of the observability ones I wanted to cover were specific to best practices really across like debugging or for all the way to production. So you have a number of configuration options. Again, some of them are specific to enabling JSON logging. So JSON logging is really handy for if you're using a monitoring backend, something like Azure Monitor or Elkstash or something like that. You can enable the log as JSON, and it allows the backend to kind of read that in better in most cases. So definitely recommend that. And this is telling me that that is not set for all of my different applications. And this is, again, another annotation I would want to add on my pod spec. Similarly, I have advisories in here for if I was running in debug mode or if I was running with sidecar logging enabled. So some of the things you're doing when you're debugging a Dapr app, great, right? You want to have all the notifications and all the information you can get about that app. You don't want that running in production because that's going to cost you a bunch of money if you're running any sort of monitoring backend. So for example, I have 2 sidecars that are running as debug. This one is the loyalty service and the receipt generation service. That's great. I can go in and change those back to info. Similarly, I also have notifications if the control plane is debug or things like that. You can set a lot of debug settings in Dapr, which is handy, for many reasons for debugging. But, one of the things that you cannot do is you got to watch your monitoring bill. That's my point. So yeah, I just wanted to show you kind of also dismissing some of these advisories. Again, this might not be that important because maybe this is my dev environment and debug logs are something that I want to do. And I can dismiss those, and that's actually going to not show up. It's not going to show up in these graphs. It's not going to show up as insights or as recommendations anymore. And I can always go in and undismiss them as well. So if I want to undo that dismissal later on for whatever reason, that's also something I can totally do. Cool. The other last kind of thing, so that's kind of mainly, some of the walkthrough of all the different advisories. I kind of went through what you can do from a sync advisories perspective every few minutes. It runs every 15 minutes. I can sync this as much as I want to. And then last but not least, I just wanted to call out, there is this send advisory report feature. And this is super handy because it allows you to see kind of where you've been with your advisories and where you've been at your level. So, before this webinar, I think I had, 26, I think, or 27, and got that down to 23, which is good for various reasons. Okay, 23. But I want to get that number up, and maybe this is something I want to share with my broader team. Maybe I want to share this, with upper management, whatever. I can output this advisory report, which will do kind of a snapshot of where you are in terms of these best practices. We've had users request this, honestly, specifically to be able to share this with other teams or other organizations, and it looks really good from a organization perspective. So I just output that, and I can also show you what that looks like. Just give me 1 second to bring up that email. Yeah, so just to prove to you that it works, here is my cluster advisory report. It's going to show me this link. It's going to give me this new advisory report. It's going to open this in my, Adobe or whatever. And it's going to show me how many impacted resources I have, how many are across, every single category of reliability, performance, and observability. And then it's going to give me a breakdown of, if those are resolved, unresolved, etc. And then or dismissed, of course. So, a really good way to kind of check progress over time and just make sure that you're kind of on track with some of those best practice recommendations, especially as you're moving towards production. Yeah, last but not least, I did want to just quickly show. So, I did talk a little bit about all these advisories in here. One of the other ways you can integrate them with your system is by using the Diagrid CLI. So the Diagrid CLI is great and it allows you to interact with all of your clusters. So here's my clusters command. I can do like clusters list. I've already logged in here, so that's why, it's showing me a couple thing here. All right, it's telling me my status of my one cluster. Make this a bit bigger. It's telling me that this status is ready. It's giving me, my ID. It's telling me my cluster type, all those things. The other thing I can do here is I can list the advisories for the full cluster, and I better give it that ID. Nope. What is my cluster ID? I should paste that in there. It's right here. So yeah, I can take a peek at all these different advisories, right? And this is exactly the same as output as I'm going to get in the UI. But what is really nice about this is we have users using this within their pipeline. So, if they're like, okay, these are all of them, maybe that's like a bit much. Maybe I just want to filter on the ones that are, high impact that are firing right now. So not resolved. I can actually run that and I can see, hey, these are my two that are firing, and we actually have people using this as a gate. Oops. We actually have people using this as a gate. So like essentially what you can do is put this within your DevOps pipeline and then say if you have any new advisories, maybe new security ones in particular, that might be something to block your deployment. Because again, as the new Dapr versions come out so frequently, as I mentioned, this is something that we add new advisories for every release. So we will be kind of keeping up to date with some of those Dapr best practices and ensuring that, each of these releases and each of these best practices, that we uncover or like the team upstream uncovers are making it into Conductor as you guys are upgrading. So that was that. Last but not least, okay, you can see my version upgraded there. And I guess, I didn't actually show this, but hey, I can take a peek at that Dapr version and see that only like a few of those were kind of upgraded. So only 2 specifically. Can also, roll out all applications, and this is going to ensure that all of those sidecars will get that latest 14.4 version, which is great. But, just wanted to test it out with a couple of apps for now. Last but not least, you can also see that we have like all of our stuff is looking good here. And then, I can also see these advisories within my dashboard. So there's less high impact advisories here, none here. And then, oh, still have 2 here. Okay, but we're getting closer. We've moved closer. So yeah, with that, I wanted to just head back to slides for 1 minute before closing it up. Yeah, so just, a quick call out if you haven't had a chance to try out Conductor and you're a little bit interested in, using any of the advisories I demoed here today, if you maybe are thinking about moving to production or you want to start out just with Conductor free. We have a couple plans that are specific to where you are within your journey. So definitely try out Conductor free if you are an individual developer or maybe you're running locally. You just want to see what it has. Definitely recommend that. Whereas like if you are an organization or running Dapr more seriously with multiple clusters, definitely try out Conductor Enterprise. We have a free trial available. Contact us or just you can start a free trial directly from our website. And then there is a QR code here which should take you there.